Good afternoon, Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. You know who the happiest man in Kenosha is right now? Bob Wirtz. Bob Wirtz, the Democratic State Senator from Kenosha. Because here's how Wirtz looks at it. People always say, I'm the craziest Democrat in Kenosha. Well, they can't say that this afternoon. See, Joe Biden's there. He's about to talk. He appears to. He's been praying for a long time here. This is one of the longer prayer. I don't want to make fun of a prayer, but I mean, I don't know if Joe's praying not to screw up or praying that they don't have the teleprompter in the right place, but there's been a very, very long prayer. And then apparently Biden is going to, let's cut away here and let's listen to this now. Here's Joe. This is Joe Biden. This is actually live.
Please stay where you are. State staff will take over. We're going to take a photo and they will direct traffic. Before we begin into that process, I'd like to thank Pastor Barker for hosting us here today, and Dr. Joe Biden and Vice President Joe Biden for being here. We wish you well. We thank you for bringing the unifying force to Kenosha. This is a community of immigrants and blacks and Latinos, Germans, Polish,
Biden's up there holding
Italians.
his wife's hand right now. I mean, she is so afraid he's going to wander off. I mean, she's clutching onto this thing.
This is to dig deep in our inner soul to heal our own community. We look forward to your leadership and the leadership of Senator Kamala Harris to restore faith in this community and faith in this country. God bless you.
Amen. Is Joe going to talk? I guess not. That was Joe. He stood there. This guy prayed, and then Joe Biden was introduced, and that appears to be the end of Joe at that particular appearance. What? Okay, he can't. He has nothing to say unless there's a teleprompter in front of him. Now there's a scandal over the teleprompter. This thing that literally was all of it. He's got these various stops. I mean, I'm assuming Joe has talked somewhere. That they don't just trot him. I mean, it's funny. You watch him. I'm telling you, his wife is holding his hand tighter than you would expect. And this isn't like one of those loving embraces. This is one of those Paul said propping him. I'm thinking it's more like when I see somebody who's got their hand on a dog leash where it's like not one of these big, slow, lumbering dogs like I would be, but like a dog that like wants to get away, like these beagles that are sniffing around and everything, and you're hanging on to it. Like, that's how she's hanging on to it. Like, don't go anywhere, you goof. That was the end of it, apparently. So Joe Biden is in Kenosha. I'm telling you, the most exciting Biden moment, whatever it will have turned out to be, will be duller than the most dull moment of the time that President Trump was there. There's rumblings, there's protesters, rounding themselves up and planning to do something this afternoon. I don't know whether or not anything is going to happen or not. This whole thing with regard to Biden coming out there is creating there's some pretty good analysis of this going on, because it is kind of weird that Biden, who's locked himself in his basement for months, all of a sudden is reemerging, and he decides to go to Kenosha only after Donald Trump went to Kenosha. Now, I'm going to try to give you some analysis of that, but before we do that, this is my last day of the, you don't have the words in here, you goof. Oh, they're under this. You put the winner's name, and then the words are under that. See, but remember my system, I throw away the first page, now I'll throw away the winner. What? I know, but you should have stapled this you should have stapled it to something else. Well, but I looked at this and anyway, I'm going to use my stroke excuse more frequently. If I claim I don't understand something, I'm going to claim it's because you're like addling a stroke patient in there. If you think it's bad dealing with me, imagine if you had to be Biden's staff. Imagine what you would have to do. I mean, imagine how many times you'd have to repeat to him where to go and then put giant, magic marker letters on this. I'm telling you, I'm guessing when he was standing in that church, I bet they put in one of those masking tape X's for him to stand on so he wouldn't go stand in the wrong place. Or maybe that's what his wife is for, just dragging and pulling him on over there. This is the guy they want to be our president of the United States. This is what they are putting up. For people who think that I'm being too mean and talking about the fact that the Democrats have nominated an adult old man who doesn't appear to know where he is and can't answer a simple question, can't read a teleprompter, and can't, has to do interviews with the questions scripted out in advance, I'm not the guy that put him up for president. Before I dive into this, let's give you the words. Citizen Summer. Somebody did mess up my chair. This arm has been lowered. Who did this now? Well, but I didn't ask you if you used the chair. You're already denying that you did it. I want to know who did this. Ugh. This always... Were any weekend shows recorded today? Yes, that's... Well, you were involved in this? Who did a guest sit in this chair? Which kind of guest would screw up my chair? I mean, who's the biggest pain in the butt of the weekend show guests? You're not going to answer that question. Oh, I didn't think you would, but I was hoping to get it out of you anyway. You never know. I mean, I'll throw these questions out hoping to get some juicy information. Come on, you could tell that, but you're not involved in all of these programs, are you? Well, but you're not involved in all of them. Well, I mean, you just put here. I mean, like somebody that comes in and messes with my chair or something or another. Come on, who is the biggest pain in the butt? Do you want me to start speculating and have you to what? You'd be fired if trust me. I mean, right now, it's just a matter of time before anyone right of center gets fired. I mean, no, but none of us even know we're going to say, you are right. If you are going to get fired, you may as well at least make it be something that is worthwhile where you at least got it out of your system. Well, maybe that's it. Come on, who's the biggest pain in the butt of these? That guy who has his system for the stock market, is it him? Is he still around? Oh, he's easy to work with. So now I'll just go by process of elimination. Whenever you say, let's say somebody where is it? Look at him now. Was this him talking now? Or is this a commercial? Turn it up. We'll turn it up.
And protective equipment that our country needs. We'll make them here in America. We'll have a national mandate to wear a mask. Not as a burden, but as a patriotic duty.
Turn that down. I'm seeing anywhere I see Biden standing up there talking, I'm hoping that maybe it's going to be something worth caring about, but apparently. What did you say? He said, if I ramble on long enough, they're going to shoot me. Well, that's a really good thing to joke about right now. If I ramble on long enough, they're going to shoot me. I'm just telling you. They get over Trump when he says these things. I mean, Trump came and said, we ought to test the system by sending in your mail-in vote twice. Now they're claiming that Trump is encouraging vote fraud. As you know, I would love to see Republicans. I don't advocate it, but I wouldn't mind seeing some Republicans trying some vote fraud because it's the only thing that will get the Democrats to stop all this cheating. If they thought for a moment that all the Republicans were going to try to vote twice with the mail-in balloting and screw that whole thing up, they wouldn't be pushing the mail-in balloting. Let me give you the words. This is Summer Cash. Trying to lean my arm down on the armrest the way it's supposed to, and it's lowered. This is bothering me more than it. Well, you know how it's like when you're used to sitting your arm down at something. Well, yeah, of course they're adjustable. Somebody adjusted it downward, but. Is there that camera's in here, isn't it? Will that tell me? Can I go and look at that? You think that's not hooked up? Then why do we have it? Well, I know that when we first put it in, Jay Weber hung a jacket over the top of it because he didn't approve of it. And I thought that's fine. Jay doesn't want it to be recorded. I don't care what goes on when he's in here. I care what goes on all the other times. I'm a major supporter of all of this kind of spying. See, some people are afraid that if somebody like, a monster like Donald Trump gets in as president, he'll be spying on all of us. What we found out, of course, that it was the Democrats that spied on Trump before he could even get in. We can't even get our own FBI to conduct any kind of proper investigation into the crime that's going on now. Anyway, I'll try to adjust to the armrest being screwed up by, who do you think did it? Dave Spano, maybe? Does he come in to do this show, or he's not in here? Does he send some minion in here? Is that what he does? What does he do? Go over to TMJ and do the show himself over there? They don't allow anybody in because of the COVID? Well, I mean, the mayor of Oak Creek, does he come in? Guys like me. You're saying the mayor of Oak Creek is a guy like me? What kind of an insult is that in there? I thought when you were the mayor of Oak Creek, I thought you were like boring. Now you're saying guys like me. So they're only allowing the host to come in over there at WTMJ. Well, we don't have anybody in here either, but we let if somebody's on the radio, we put them on. So what are those? Are they just doing it by phone on those shows, or is that what they do? I don't listen to any of that crap on the weekends. I don't listen to your crap, their crap, none of the crap. I don't listen to any of that crap. Not that it's crap. I'm sure it's all. Well, what is it? What would you say it is? Informative? No, but I know what it is. It's self-help shows. Are you saying it's informative? Is it entertaining? Well, it is informative. Okay. The ones they have over there aren't informative. Is Gus still out over there? Gus is doing commercials again. I'm glad to hear Gus on the air. But anyway, Gus is doing commercials. So Gus is still around. But he doesn't appear to have any kind of a show. Tom Faze is gone. Yeah. Who do they have over there then? I don't even know who we have. All I know is that we have these ones that keep running the commercials saying that they're going to be on this weekend. And then they come on. Sizzling Summer. I'm driving me. I keep leaning my arm off the thing, going down to the armrest. And I don't. Why would anyone possibly have done this? Why would they lower one armrest and not the other? It doesn't make any sense, which is why I'm completely bothered by it. I clearly handling this with tremendous maturity, as you see. The word for this hour is smile. We had another winner on my program yesterday. Who was it? I just threw it over here. Julene Ryman, where was she from? Maquanago. She won $1,000 on the show yesterday. This is the last day of the contest that I'm here. It runs through Friday. Of course, I don't do a show on Friday. So we have 4 more chances for one of you to win on my program, and this is one of them. The word is smile. You have until 4 p.m. to text that in to 200-200. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard date, and message rates. Apply in this nationwide contest. I do want to conclude the serious thought that I was making here about. And there's a lot of pieces being written on the internet about this seeming change of strategy. There's even a description that the Biden campaign is panicking. Now, I don't, as critical as I want to be of the Biden campaign, this doesn't strike me as panicking. Panicking would be, I don't know, doing something radically out of the blue. Sending the presidential candidate out to campaign is normal activity. It's just different in that Joe Biden has not been out to campaign for 7 months. What was abnormal was the way he was running his campaign until a few days ago when he decided to leave the basement, or at least when they told him, Joe, you have to leave the basement. And his wife dragged him out to Pittsburgh, and now she dragged him over to Kenosha, and so on. But there is a reason that they've made the decision to do it. And as you know, I believe, without regard to what the polls have indicated, that there's been a turn in this campaign. It was timed along with the conventions, along with the month of August, which I think not only was a nightmare for this country, is going to turn out to have been a disaster for the Democrats because, and we're going to get into this in a moment here, I think for the first time, a lot of people realized what it actually means to be a radical liberal Democrat. A lot of it was theoretical in the past. When you see what has happened in Portland, when you see what happened in New York, where they still are almost entirely shut down and the economy is trashed, where the governor, at the beginning of COVID, ordered the nursing homes to take in COVID patients. Of all the dumb things that's been done during the coronavirus outbreak, I still think that's the single dumbest decision made by any public official. Dumber than the lockdowns, dumber than the mask ordinances, dumber than any of it. When Andrew Cuomo, in the state that was going to become ground zero for the outbreak of the virus, ordered nursing homes to take COVID patients where everybody else was obviously refusing to take in somebody who might be infected. All the other nursing homes, they were stopping like family members and going in to visit somebody who was dying. In the meantime, Cuomo's letting somebody who's got the virus to be able to walk right, come on in, no problem. Anyway. to the pathetic response of Tony Evers in Wisconsin over the Kenosha rioting, suddenly this, what it's like to be governed by a Democrat, is less theoretical and becomes real. You know, it's been hard for some of us to explain how horrible AOC's Green New Deal, which has now been adopted and is virtually part of the Democratic platform, really is, because I don't think it really dawns on people how damaging it is to the economy when you essentially raise the cost of manufacturing 40% and impose the kinds of taxes that would impose and eliminate production of so many of the fossil fuels that we have that we still need to power our country. Remember, electricity is powered by fossil fuels as well, not just oil, not just coal. But this has brought it home. I think of somebody who lives, say, good example here. I don't want to take a really Republican area. I'll just say Sheboygan Falls. I mean, you have Democrats up there, you have Republicans up there. And you take a look at the big cities and you think, okay, the Democrats are in charge of the big cities. What do I care? I live in Sheboygan Falls. True, Milwaukee's a mess, and Milwaukee's public schools are a mess. True, Chicago's a mess, and Chicago's public schools are a mess. And it's also true that the United States Supreme Court's liberals might do things I don't particularly like. But otherwise, it's just two different versions of the same thing. In fact, we've had a number of people in recent years say that there's no real difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. And if you live away from the fray, like, say, Sheboygan Falls, maybe that theory would make some sense to you. The month of August, and now early in here into September, has changed that. We now realize what the Democrats really do believe in. They believe in going into a city like Wauwatosa and just driving the residents there crazy. They believe in slashing our police force so that we have very few cops. They believe that if something happens that they don't like, we ought to, for days on end, allow people to riot and burn down cities. They don't believe that police officers should intervene and try to use force to try to stop insurrection when it is going on. And we also know that they won't even acknowledge it when it happens. You could take it a step further, I imagine, and get away from politicians. You learn to realize that it means demagoguing and demonizing, such as the statements that were put out by Peggy Troy, the hack that runs Children's Hospital, who jumped to conclusions about the Kenosha shooting and misstated a number of facts, to Michelle Goss at the Kohl's Corporation, and so on. The point that I make is we're getting a first-hand glimpse into what these Democrats actually think, and how that even for somebody who lives away from the big cities and doesn't think that they're directly affected by them, how dangerous they actually are. We're actually seeing who they are and what they believe in. I really don't know that you could have a better example of it than what happened a week and a half ago now, the day of the Blake shooting in Kenosha, when Tony Evers responded by, instead of immediately understanding that things could pop badly in Kenosha, decided to light the match himself by going out and issuing an incendiary statement. When violence started to occur, he responded a day later by doing the least amount that he could possibly do and sending out only the 125 National Guardsmen. Kenosha was left unprotected for 2 full days. It wasn't until the 3rd day that any kind of real show of force came in, and by then it was too late. You have what you have now. And everyone in this state saw it. And I don't think that, other than naive Democrats, there isn't anybody who didn't think after the Blake shooting that Kenosha would be flattened. As you know, I came on the program Monday. The events occurred on Saturday and Sunday. And I said that I was very worried that it was going to be terrible in Kenosha on Monday night. You may recall that program. It was just a week and a half ago. And I said that the authorities needed to do was be extremely aggressive and proactive and try to stop lawbreaking anywhere they could find it, because if they allowed this to start, they would never bring it under control. And Monday night was bad. Tuesday was the day that Evers added from his 125 to 250 in the National Guard. And the 2-day process of Kenosha no longer being the beautiful city that we know it to be was underway. The point that I make is I think almost anybody with any common sense could have seen this coming. I'm not a savant in figuring out that they were going to burn Kenosha to the ground. All you have to do is take a look at what's going on everywhere else in the United States where things like this are occurring. Furthermore, you can't say that Black Lives Matter and Antifa have not indicated what they plan to do here. They have said that they want to take this stuff out to the suburbs. They've said it repeatedly. They even chant, "No justice, no peace." They say that there isn't going to be peace until they get what they want. And they've had this campaign to try to take this away from neighborhoods and areas that are predominantly Democratic areas and move it into neighborhoods in which they bring some of the pain to the people that they really don't like. So having said that they said that, I don't know how anybody could not have thought that they were going to go in and try to bring destruction into Kenosha. That means that either the Democrats, who didn't think that this was going to happen, are too stupid to run anything, or they wanted it to happen. Evers has only two possible explanations that he can offer. I was too stupid to understand that they were going to have people come in from all over the country and burn Kenosha down. I was too stupid to figure out that's what's going on. Or I wanted to let him do it. What's the third option? He didn't try to stop them. He didn't have proper personnel in place. And he, in fact, issued a statement that seemed to be a wink, wink, nod, nod, go for it. Blowtorch the city down. This is who Democrats really are. Now, to conclude my point with regard to Biden, I believe that this is a turning point in public perceptions. The way the Democrats have tried to run against Trump is that Trump is a scary guy and Trump is dangerous. Trump's not presidential. Suddenly, a lot of people who might have been buying into that, these people in the middle, realize that whatever they don't like about Trump, he's not as scary as a political party that will not protect them if rioters come in and try to destroy them. And again, rioting until very recently was always a big city only thing. Until a few weeks ago, when has anyone who didn't live in a big, huge city ever had to worry about rioting? The only time rioting would occur in suburbs is be like suburbs that are right connected to the big city, like some on the south side of Chicago and some of the south, the Rodney King riot spilled into Compton and some of the cities down there and so on, low-income communities, just different municipalities. But other than that, rioting is never anything that anybody's had to worry about that didn't live in, say, in New York or Chicago or New Orleans, Miami, Washington, D.C., L.A., etc. Now this, and they see directly that when rioting starts, Democratic officials won't try to stop it. And in fact, many actually participate. They see in a place like Wauwatosa that elected Democratic members of the state legislature were present when people went to the home of a police officer whose boyfriend was the target of the protest, and they vandalized her home, and many were there carrying long guns. And one of them fired a gunshot into the home. And they saw that there were elected Democratic officials that were part of that mob. They see that the mayor of Wauwatosa has appointed a member of that mob to be the head of the ad hoc commission that they've created on policing. So my point that I'm making here is I think people are realizing that the Democrats are scarier than some folks thought that they were, or that some of the issues that we have going on in the United States right now are scarier than the things that we had before. A lot of people may not have been afraid of the Green New Deal, but they are deathly afraid that if hundreds or thousands of people from out of state come in with gasoline, igniters, flamethrowers, fireworks to try to loot and burn out their city, that the Democratic Party isn't going to try to stop them and apparently is okay with it. You can, now, better than a week after the rioting in Kenosha occurred, go out there and try to find a collection of quotes of Democratic elected officials who have condemned the Kenosha rioting. They don't even condemn it after it's happened. We have a news media clearly exposed as liberal that won't call the rioting rioting. You still see this word unrest out there. I mean, I'd love to just walk up to Ted Perry. Ted, say riot. Can you say it? Can you say it? I might have to send Ted a copy of Sly and the Family Stone. I think they did There's a Riot Going On, didn't they? Wasn't that them? Well, that's Sly who did There's a Riot Going On. You think that's right? Why don't you look it up or so? You should play There's a Riot Going On. You know, Ted Perry and the guys over at Channel 12, they'll put their fingers in their ears. You can't say the word riot. How bad would it have had to have gotten for them to actually say that it was a riot? What about then the one on the foot patrol that always marches around with them? She won't call any of this stuff riots either. You got it. It's got to be in there. It's like might have just been the album title though, right? Yeah, I think it's just the album title. I think that's the problem. Was that the title of one of the songs too? Yeah, but that's the album title. But you've got a cut of that also. See, but back in the day, Sly, when people actually, what do you think, Paul? Should I have thrown away my records here now that I moved and everything? I know. Now remember, yeah, but I have a turntable. It was, you know how much it cost to hook my turntable up to my wireless sound system and all of that stuff? Yeah, I know, but it meant more wires, and I don't want wires, and I don't want to actually see gadgets. They came up with a way I'd have to pay for it to put the turntable in one room so you wouldn't actually have to see it. The spending is ending on all of this. So I got all these records. I have not played an LP in 40 years. I don't think I take that back. I've used the turntable from time to time, but most of the records I have not been played in 40 years. Since I haven't played them in 40 years, and my standard has been, with regard to throwing things out, if I haven't used it in the last 5 years, I don't need it, therefore I'm throwing it away. What's the argument for not throwing away the records? You know I'm never going to play them. What's the argument? You said I shouldn't throw them away. You never know. Well, no, you do know. Do you think I'm going to ever play any of those records? No. Well, for one thing, I got Apple Music. They're all out. I can play any of them that I want to hear right now. They're all online. I mean, I actually think the only reason to save them is the covers. I don't need the discs inside. The covers are very cool, though. I don't know. But the sound I just hear is the scratchiness from, we did not take care of those albums when we had them. I mean, no, it's just, I am concerned that there's a vulgarism in there. Sly was one of the earlier swearers out there in music. We better not. Yeah, I know. I remember what it's from. In fact, the point that I was going to make is Sly and the Family Stone always had great album covers. That was back in the day in which, because there were albums and people go into the record store and they go browsing through, you'd want the album cover would have to get your attention. Well, he had great ones. Plus, Sly had one of the better afros. Sly had an afro that was better than Jimi Hendrix's afro. And Jimi Hendrix was like the first rock star to have a really, really cool afro, but Sly had one too. Anyway, maybe we shouldn't play it without you previewing it. Should we play it or not? Have you previewed it? Would you? All right, let's play a little riot going on here. All right, that's enough of that. So anyway, for the people in the media, there was a riot going on. The point that I want to make now that I try to digress back into making a serious point again is that even after it's occurred and even after we have seen that this has horrified people, not just people on the right, but people in the middle and even some on the left, that they have been horrified to see what's happened in the city, just as you realize that while many of them won't admit it, that there are a lot of residents of Wauwatosa, maybe even left of center, who hate the fact that their community is being ripped apart with the kind of hooliganism that's going on night after night after night after night after night. But even when you have a case like Kenosha in which what happened is horrible, the devastation is incredible, where innocent citizens were injured and knocked over trying to protect their property. Despite all of that, you still can't get many Democrats to condemn the fact that it occurred. All you'll get is, well, we don't condone destruction. There's not a lot of heart in that. There's not the angry denunciations or the disgust or the revulsion that you'd hear from a normal thinking person. So I think that this has come through pretty loud and clear for a lot of people. That even after it happens, the Democrats aren't especially bothered by it. So the issue's kind of been something that's made a turn here in America, and it's impacted the presidential race. The one thing you've got to give Donald Trump credit for is he has tremendous political instincts. He's been ahead of just about everybody else in both parties on any number of issues. And he felt that it was very important, not only politically, but as the leader of the country, to go to Kenosha, a city that had been, that has had a number of blocks just taken down to rubble, and make a stand here that we do not condone this. In the same way that you often look for a leader to show up and do a helicopter tour after a hurricane or something, Donald Trump wanted to have boots on the ground, his boots on the ground, and make a stand on behalf of law and order in America and symbolize himself as that stand. 2 days later, all of a sudden, who's here? Old Grandpa takes the pajamas off and comes out of the closet, and now Biden's walking around. There's a reason for that. There's a reason Biden's campaign has chosen to do that, and I think they realize that this is the type of issue that turns elections. Every 4 years that we have a presidential election, something happens that no one ever had anticipated. And the kinds of things that you think were going to be the talking points, a lot of people thought the talking points were going to be the issues over which Trump was impeached. Others thought the talking points would be the strength of the economy. Those things are all in the back burner right now. And you see what's out there. And this is what happens really every 4 years, that events come around. Go back to W. Bush's first campaign when they dropped the October surprise and they dug up his drunk driving from 20 years earlier. I don't think anybody anticipated that something like that would A, bother anyone, or B, that the Democrats would bring it up, or C, that the media would wait as long as they did on it. But this is how things play themselves out. And I think right now that the thing that is the most compelling issue that's confronting the country is not coronavirus. It is not relationship with China. It is that we are seeing that we are headed toward insurrection in this city, that you have a sizable number of Americans, they're a minority, but a sizable number who want to create mass destruction. The Portland incident, Portland is now, I think it's a day 101 days of insurrection going on in that city. And when you watch what's going on in Portland, and everybody's seeing the footage, you realize it isn't just a handful of people. And then the next time, well, they'll be back in Chicago. They're ripping Chicago apart and they're looting through all of the stores. And people are watching this and they're realizing that in all of the places that it's going on, they are met with no resistance from authorities. No authorities are trying to stop them. In Portland, there's not been any real attempt to stop Antifa from destroying that city night after night after night. And they also saw that it was not until President Trump was allowed by Tony Evers to get National Guardsmen into Wisconsin, the third night of the Kenosha thing, that we were able to bring that under control, after which it was too late. So I think as you see changes in the way Biden is campaigning and the fact that he felt the need to come here, and, the little bit that I saw is that he called for unity. With who? Who's Biden telling me I'm supposed to unify with? People that burned Kenosha down? They don't want unity. By definition, they're looking to have total division in our country. They want anarchy. So who are we supposed to unify with? I've been unified between, law-abiding citizens in the United States and the police department and the other authorities that we have. That's who I'm united with. Who's Joe Biden telling me to unite with? The fact of the matter is he doesn't know that it's a line that they wrote because unity is a good buzzword to put out there. But in terms of what it means of the actual policy that the Democrats have here, I did not hear Biden go into Kenosha and condemn The outsiders who came in and burned the city to the ground. I didn't hear Biden come into Kenosha and condemn the lousy governor we have in Wisconsin for not protecting the people of Kenosha. I didn't hear Biden essentially do any of that stuff. He met with the Blake family and muttered something about police shootings and then called for unity. Do understand that police shootings are not the reasons we have these riots. Police shootings are the trigger that is used to do the riots that Antifa and BLM want all along. These are organizations that have been planning for some time to bring insurrection to the United States. If it wasn't a police shooting, it could just as easily be something else that they use as a flashpoint. The police shooting, however, gives them cover to do the thing that they really want to do, and that is to burn the whole baby down. That is their goal and desire. And as I say, I don't think that's much of a secret right now. The thing that I think has shocked a lot of people who are in the center is that the Democrats aren't opposed to it. There just was a presumption, because this is the way it has been forever, that neither side supports rioting. That everybody supports the right of people to protest and air their grievances, but it's got to be peaceful. You now see, however, in place after place after place, it isn't like it's just been Portland or it's just been Seattle or it's just been Los Angeles or it's just been New York or it's just been New Orleans or it's just been Miami or it's just been Chicago or it's even just been Wauwatosa. This has been going on all over the place, and every place that it goes on, if there's a Democrat in charge, they don't lift a finger to stop it from happening. And they never can bring themselves, they can, even now in Portland. Have you heard Joe Biden rip Antifa for what they're doing in Portland? You're just kidding. Well, there's no place for violence. You finally got that out of him weeks later. Paul has the audio of Biden's address at the church in Kenosha. You want to play it there or what? What are you telling me in there? It's really long and it's, what do you, okay. Well, I can't, that's surprising. Joe Biden is really long and it's really rambling. Does he talk about getting shot again? About the rambling? All right, play a little of this. Is just Paul grabbing some Joe Biden from the church in Kenosha.
Even back to Eric Garner, I can't breathe. Been proposing these for a long time. I mean, literally, for years. And the one thing I think we have to acknowledge, my mom used to have an expression. I'd say, you want to know me? Come walk in my shoes a mile. Well, even though I've been involved with the African American community and the civil rights movement since I've been a junior in high school, desegregating movie theaters and the like, I can't understand what it's like to walk out the door or send my son out the door or my daughter and worry about just because they're black, they may not come back. I can't really, I can intellectually understand it, but I can't.
You just said you couldn't.
I can't feel it. I just spent an hour or more with the family as they got off the airplane.
You can't come up with the name.
I had an opportunity to spend some time with Jacob on the phone. He's out of ICU. We spoke for about 15 minutes. His brother and two sisters, his dad, and his mom on the telephone. And I've spoken to him a lot before, but we spent time together with my wife. And he talked about how nothing was going to defeat him. How whether he walked again or not, he was not going to give up.
Now, let's remember, we're talking here about an accused sex criminal who was walking away from police and trying to get into a car that he intended to steal with his children inside the car.
He raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn until keep you hold you in the palm of his hand until we meet again. Well, I think, Alderman, what's been unleashed with a lot of people is they understand that fear doesn't solve problems. Only hope does.
What does that have to do with anything?
If you give up hope, you might as well surrender. There's no real option. And as we
These
talk,
are all just non sequiturs. How did we get to fear doesn't solve problems? That people realize that's why they rioted, because fear doesn't solve problems, hope does. Let's listen to this now. This is you're just throwing out fragments of sentences.
And as I said, his dad, his son, his brother, 2 sisters, and a family lawyer. 2 family lawyers were there. And what I came away with was the overwhelming sense of resilience and optimism that they have about the kind of response they're getting. His mom talked about. My wife asked to say a prayer, and his mom said a prayer. But she said, "I'm praying for Jacob, and I'm praying for the policeman as well. I'm praying that things change." If you think a little bit about where we are right now.
Yeah.
It's been a terrible, terrible wake-up call that's gotten the rest of the nation to realize that it's a confluence of 3 things. 1, the COVID crisis. 2, and we didn't have to have over 6 million people contract COVID, over 186,000 dead.
Is he going to finish the 3 things?
If we had acted. If we had just acted. It's been pointed out by the University of Columbia Law School that if he had acted just 1 week earlier, 37,000 more people would have been alive. If he acted 2 weeks earlier, 51,000, maybe 31 and 57.
We are still on this Kenosha, Joe, over here.
Still be alive.
Here, he's going to get to the second one.
You have to take responsibility.
Remember, he said he was going to say this is a confluence of 3 things. I think he might pull it off. You think he'll get to the 3 things?
I take no responsibility. Well, I think the country is much more primed to take responsibility because they now have...
I don't know. I think we've stopped at the 1.
You see.
And the confluence was the COVID.
We do, Portia, because they're not a bright young black woman with 2 kids, or is it 2 or 3 children that you have to worry about.
Oh, this is dangerous.
But there are changes that are taking place.
What? Well, like what? What?
In the country, and one of the problems is that, look, this is not about me. It's really not about me. But if we have 4 more years, we're going to have 4 more years of the exact same thing, only it's going to impact us for a couple generations. And the public kind of understands that now. And I think they're so ready to do so many things they either are fully unaware of or aware of but never registered with them before, or they just have seen things that they hadn't seen before.
Like what? What things are you talking about, Joe? There's things that they're not. People are seeing things that they're not aware of, but they're.
He said,
yeah?
I know that's ancient history. You weren't even born. But when Bull Connor, I was in grade school.
Oh, he's got Bull Connor now. Now we're talking about Bull Connor. He was the old sheriff and racist sheriff from the South, 50s and 60s.
Black women going to church in their Sunday best and little kids having the skin ripped off them by these high-powered firearms.
Yeah, Bull Connor was a Democrat, by the way.
I thought he was putting a wooden stake in the heart of the civil rights movement. But in other parts of the country where they heard about this but didn't believe it ever happened, everybody turned on a black and white TV. And I saw it. Said, "Oh my God!"
Oh, he's going down memory lane now. That's
emancipation.
No, the 3. We were wrong. He never got to. He finished 3 points. He never got to the second point. I mean, I sometimes will start that off myself, but all right, that's really. Paul thinks it's painful to listen to this. That you feel sorry for him. You sure that it's you sure it's painful that it's not kind of like funny or not?
Floyd died, having his face pressed up against that curb. People not only in the United States, but all around the world said, "Oh my God, it really, really happens." When you had a man of his size and...
Now we're on George Floyd.
Calling for his mom. It struck a nerve that hadn't been struck before. It's awful it has to happen. But I think we're at one of those moments We have this opportunity. If we don't let up, we don't let up. There's a reason why.
What are you saying? We should riot? What do you, don't let up.
Wants to only talk about dividing the country and about law and order. They don't want to talk about all those people who have died from COVID. They don't want to talk about the fact that almost 1 million people again file for unemployment, don't have jobs. They don't want to talk about the fact that you have tens of thousands of businesses closing, and maybe for good. You don't want to talk about the fact that
this is coming from the guy who says that if the numbers spike, he's going to shut the country down again, and now he's complaining about the unemployment.
States
I know what.
To be able to keep firefighters on the job, teachers on the job, first responders on the job, etc.
Your side's the side that wants to cut the funding for these people.
They don't feel it's their obligation. They're trying to divert us.
Paul, I don't want to listen to this anymore. This is... Paul's insisting we keep listening. Why? It's my show. You can't make me keep listening to this. I know what's he still with now.
Out of the White House, where I'll bring everyone to the table, including police chiefs, including civil rights activists, including the NAACP.
Yeah, that's the big thing he always says. I'll bring everybody to the table. He never says what it is what's supposedly going to do.
Sit down there and we're going to work it out.
Work out, okay.
Because a significant portion of the police are decent people. But there's a lot of bad folks in every organization. There's not a whole lot of people who want to speak up, be the odd man out or odd woman out, no matter what outfit you work with. And so we got to give a chance to change things, and we can. There is not a single solitary reason in the world why, as I said, we shouldn't be in a position that everybody. Hey, that's my wife, Jill. Hey, Jilly. I'm Jill's husband, actually. But I guess I should cut to the chase here. We're in a situation now where we cannot let up. We cannot let up. Violence in any form is wrong. The idea that this president continues to try to divide us, give succor to the white supremacist, talks about how there's really good people on both sides, talks in ways that are just absolutely, I've never used this regard to president before, not only incorrect but immoral. They're just simply wrong. Simply wrong. And the one concern I have, and I understand it, is that people are going to be so frustrated, particularly in the communities that need the help the most, need to be treated most clearly.
Yeah. Okay, that's enough. I mean, I actually want to address some of those points that he makes. I mean, all you can do is respond to some of his fragments because, as I say, he just throws these, it's like a bunch of prepositional clauses that he throws, whatever it is. He'll throw out a phrase and then a clause. And one isn't connected to the other, but somewhere in there when you hear it, you sort of think what's in his head. He just can't, he's not able to complete the point that he's trying to make. He criticizes Trump for saying that good people on both sides. He just got done saying himself, there's good people on both sides. Remember, he said there's some good police, there's some bad police. So he says the same thing. Then he gets out of this thing, we can't let up. And then he realizes that the way that we're actually fighting this is by having riots and you can't have violence and so on. So they tried him out there. Paul thinks it sounds like he's on fentanyl right now. This is what he is. They've got to get him out there in a way that he's not panicked because he doesn't like being out there in public. He's not comfortable. They want him to be able to talk because they realize he's got to be able to address this stuff. And he just comes up and gives you all of this. You contrast this with a very clear message that President Trump came out and offered in which he said, we are going to be a country of laws and we are going to keep order. Trump presented leadership. What was this other than kind of pathetic, sad, and a little scary? We've seen in Madison what happens when you elect a governor who is in over his head and doesn't know what to do. He's surrounded by Madison radicals who told him, let's go out and rip the police and then do nothing and let Kenosha burn for 3 days. And he didn't know any better. But Tony Evers, as much as I made fun of the sleepiness of Tony Evers, for crying out loud, I mean, he's Einstein compared to Biden right now. Joe Biden's a zombie. The instant they put him on that plane, he's going to be asleep. You'd think that they give him the coffee to wake him up before he goes out for a thing like this. I mean, it's something. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, as bad as that appearance was, and as bad as he sounded when he came here, and as disjointed and goofed up and sleepy that old Joe was, they felt the need to bring him out here because there's been a turn of public opinion in this country on this issue of security. And Biden appears to be trying to reinforce his base here by saying that the most important thing to talk about is the racial injustice or whatever, even though I just said it more clearly than he said it. And I'm trying to figure out what it was that he actually meant, because he just kept referring to things and we need to change things and bring everybody together around the table. Whereas Trump's message is one of establishing law and order, believing that you can't have any change and you can't have any process if Americans are unsafe in their own homes. I think the issue is one that the Democrats are losing control of, and they didn't really anticipate this. It's not surprising that a party that has been hijacked by radicals is being run in a radical fashion. The difficulty that they are facing is they're being run in a radical fashion at the same time that they're going in front of the American public for an election. And what has happened here with the violence in the streets that's going on all over the United States, and we saw firsthand right here in our own backyard in Kenosha, is that it becomes an issue that is a defining issue for voters. A lot of issues aren't defining issues for them. Sadly, most voters don't care that much about abortion one way or another, and they'll accept politicians on both sides. Same thing with regard to trade. Most voters don't care one way or another. Only really informed people who are dialed in on the issues care about them. A lot of other issues that are out there. But being fearful that if you live in a middle-class neighborhood in a medium-sized city, you're going to have your house burned out, and that your police department won't come to protect you, and that your governor believes that if a police officer shoots an African American, it should give carte blanche for people to burn a city down for 3 days. That's a transformative political issue. I spent a lot of time making that point when we worked in the whole Biden thing. I'm going to, in the next hour of the program, share with you a couple of, I think, examples to bring this point home here of a shift that you are seeing as people are finally beginning to see how truly rotten the Democrats have gotten in this country, in that they no longer believe. There used to be these shared beliefs that we've had in this country where both parties just said, well, that's a given. Both believe, well, yeah, we're both patriotic. We have different views. Both a given. One of the givens was that we support law and order, and we believe in public safety. The Democrats no longer believe in that. They do not believe in law and order. They believe in dissension, disruption, damage in order to get their way. That used to be something that you could ascribe only to a wing of their party. It now is their party. So here's Biden being forced to come out to Kenosha to try to stem this turn of public opinion on the whole thing, and he doesn't know how to address it, because the one thing he can't do is they can't turn on themselves. I discussed yesterday that Bill Clinton got elected president in part because of his Sister Souljah moment. I don't believe that Joe Biden is smart enough to do a Sister Souljah moment, and I also don't think that the Democratic Party right now could abide having its leader damn everyone from Bernie Sanders on left. You are right. All the chairs that aren't broke are worse than the ones that tried out two of the other chairs. The arm broke off here before I got in here. So you really think those cameras aren't hooked up to anything? Well, how do you know that? Well, that was my big thing. I wanted to get cameras in here because I wanted to see who was always coming in here and breaking things. I think O'Donnell broke this, is what I think. First of all, you know he sits in my chair. Don't you think, well, do you think he sits in one of these other chairs, or do you think he sits in my chair? Oh, you don't know. You'd have no opinion on that. Well, all right, guess. Does Dan O'Donnell sit in one of these chairs, or does he want to sit in my chair? Sits in my chair. That's why was it so hard to get you to spit that out? I never did finish that thing about, so you think I should save these record albums even though I haven't played any of them in decades, because why? They don't take, they do though. Well, actually, they don't. I have a lot of them. I mean, You got to remember, in my era, I mean, that's all the kind of music until. I mean, the 8 tracks were coming around like when I was going to college. I mean, before that, it was just albums, and nobody had an 8 track other than for the car. I mean, the albums are what you had at home, and plus the albums are just cooler. I mean, the album covers and all of that stuff. You know, they've had these debates about the best rock and roll album covers, and it just becomes an irrelevant thing now because people just have digital downloads. Even in the CD era, there were the little tiny stupid boxes, and those CD boxes were so cheap they'd always break. A lot of people just got rid of them and saved their CDs. Didn't save the box, but the album cover, I mean, they were major works of art, and they were ways in which you try to sell the album. And for people who can't fathom that people would buy entire albums because now people just want to download songs, well, what happens? People like me would go to record stores, and there are all these bins. You know, probably the last 2 record stores of real size that I remember in Milwaukee is the Exclusive Company was on the east side, and of course, everybody remembers Radio Doctors, which was downtown at 3rd and Wells. Forever, you go up these aisles, and there's all these bins, and they were generally alphabetized or put out by category, and you flip through and you take a look at all the records ad. If there was an album cover that was sort of caught your eye or you knew the name of the artist, you'd stop and look at it. And there were some that were really, really famous. There were some that were very controversial. Sticky Fingers is probably the most controversial album cover of all. Well, John and Yoko were naked on one of theirs, and they had to sell that one in a brown paper. Well, Beatles Light Up in just white. Well, but I mean, it was cool. It was cool. And first of all, it was a cool album, so we just decided that it was cool, and the Beatles did it. Who was anybody to say that the Beatles weren't cool? But Sticky Fingers, now, you know the story of the Sticky Fingers album cover? You do, yeah. I mean, it's a picture of Mick Jagger's crotch in his pants, and his zipper, there was an actual zipper, a metal zipper you could pull down, and the title of the album is Sticky Fingers. I mean, I don't think you could do that now. How did we do that? How did they do that then? You know, there's probably quite a few things that you could do then that you can't do now. It's in the area of sex that we actually seem to have become more prude-like than we were before, which I don't think you would have anticipated or figured. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA was a really good album cover. So was Born to Run. Almost anything that the Beatles did from about 1967 on. The Beatles, the first half of their incarnation, basically did singles. And then from Sgt. Pepper on, maybe Revolver on, they were an album band, and people wanted to buy the album because they wanted to hear every song that the Beatles did. And the Sgt. Pepper cover, I'm sure that's on everybody's list of the top 10 album covers of all time. There are a few others that were rather eclectic, but it's a thing that we've lost, album covers. So yeah, I probably want to keep the album covers, but I can get rid of the albums. But how much space am I saving by that? That's just weight. But hard to justify having. I did throw away all the cassettes, though. I mean, they're just laying around. I mean, I've moved them, and I have not thrown away all the CDs, but I bet I have 250, 300 CDs. You know, they'll never be played again, probably, right? I mean, they say there's companies, that'll dub all those, but you don't really need to do it because most people have a music service that can call most of that stuff up anyway, right? Yeah, that sort of sucks. I know it's more convenient now, but having these things, there was some value to it. I didn't finish it. The albums, that's how people learned who musicians were. The liner notes on these albums, often you'd print the entire lyrics. So people actually, one of the reasons people knew the lyrics of songs is you'd actually read them as opposed to try to figure out what they say. They list who the musicians were who played every part on each thing, and then there'd be artwork inside the things, and there's all of that. You ended up with more of a connection to the entire people who were involved. The engineer's name, the producer, the names of the people who produced rock and roll records in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those are legendary people. They're very, very well known because their names are all over the albums. You always have to bring up some dumbbell point. They were used to clean the seeds out of marijuana. See, you were in the cassette era. That's what when you were in college, that's what people bought, right? Cassettes. Not that many albums. I bet the albums are pretty much going out by the time you were around. Yeah, I'm just thinking about when I transitioned, and I think in the 80s I was buying mostly cassettes. And cassettes had a very short thing because CDs came out very quickly in that gap with it was 8 tracks first. And the only advantage to the 8-track was that but there was no way to play music in your car until there was an 8-track. You couldn't play a record spinning around on the thing in your car. The 8-track allowed you to do that. The cassettes then, they went both places, and people who had the high-end cassette decks in their homes, they'd play off the cassette in. Problem, of course, with the cassette is you'd have to wind it to get it to the place that you wanted it to be and so on. And then here came the CDs, which weren't perfect, but you could do it by track, and that's sad. That was rather dull. All right, here's the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest word for the 4 o'clock hour. The word is win, W-I-N, win. Text that into 200-200. You can win $1,000 in cash. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. As I said, I want to continue along this line that we've had a turning point moment politically and maybe culturally in America. Now that people realize that the Democrats will not protect them, even if there are violent mobs that are at their door, and even if they have done nothing themselves that even a liberal would object to. Many of the people of Kenosha who probably suffered here were liberals and Democrats themselves, just as the people that are being made miserable when the protesters roar through Wauwatosa, and it was ugly last night. And the media just will not show this. I've got all this video that people make of just the vulgar ranting and raving. That there are people out there that are seriously unhinged. I think literally mentally ill, the way they're raving at the top of their lungs and screaming in the faces of police officers and screaming at residential homes, and understanding that the mayor is on my program this week. He came right out and said, I'm not going to do anything to stop it. He thinks that trying to do something to stop it was going to inflame it. That's what he thinks. And that's an eye-opener for people. That's what Democrats think. We're not going to stop mass lawbreaking. We're not going to stop totally uncivil behavior because that will make the people engaging in the uncivil behavior even madder. That's right. They're going to be even madder than they were when they burned Kenosha to the ground. Real quick observation here. I never finished this point on yesterday's program, and I'm not going to have time to cover it in any great depth this afternoon, but I was referring at the beginning of yesterday's show to biting the hand that feeds you, which is what most of the major sports leagues are doing right now. They are deeply insulting many of their fans by embracing the radical agenda of people that are out there protesting in the streets, an agenda that I don't think is supported by the majority of Americans. It's not just the use of the Black Lives Matter logo, which is the logo of an organization that many people strongly disagree with. It's the messages that are put out constantly condemning police every single time we have a police shooting. It would not harm some of these people to acknowledge that the incident that occurred in Kenosha occurred because, without regard to how it ended and who's to blame for that, it occurred because a man who had an open warrant for a sex crime was walking away from police, resisting arrest, and trying to take off and steal a vehicle. It wouldn't hurt to mention, for example, that had Jacob Blake behaved like a decent law-abiding citizen and cooperated with the police, none of it would have occurred. Anyway, the fact that none of that is mentioned, and instead we always turn this into, this is a terrible country, it's a racist nation, and all of these sports leagues are embracing this. A message bought and paid for straight out of Nike in China. You have soured a lot of people. It's a real thing. I don't think this is all people are going to get over it, because I don't think the messaging is going to stop. What, does anybody think that by this time next season, the LeBron James isn't still going to be shooting off his political mouth? Does anyone think that the National Football League, that all the political activism is ever going to go away? The reason that businesses in the entertainment business industry have tended to stay away from political messaging is because it does divide people. So you take a look at a situation like the Milwaukee Bucks right now. Shockingly, they're down 2-0 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. I'm telling you, I don't think many people care. Well, if they don't care, that means you're losing them as fans. Now, I grant you, part of it is this weird thing. It's in the summer. It doesn't seem like a real season. You can't even go to the games. They're in this dumbbell bubble down there in Orlando. That's probably part of it. Even if we didn't have all the political statements, maybe some people wouldn't be into it as much anyway. I wonder, however, if these billionaire owners of these sports teams realize that they might be deeply damaging their product and that they may have shoved a lot of their fans to something I think worse than being mad at them. Because fans have been mad at sports teams and sports leagues forever. Team sucks one year, they make a bad trade, you get mad at them. The worst thing that's worse than being mad at them is not giving a crap. Apathy. And I think that right now the Brewers have a fair amount of apathy in their fan base. The Bucks have a fair amount of apathy in their fan base. And I think that the worst thing is going to be when the National Football League starts, there will be total apathy in their fan base, because if you think the basketball thing is bad, what is coming for us in terms of the activism for football is apparently, you ain't seen nothing yet. It's just going to be one anti-American protest after another, after another, after another. It's going to be every time somebody gets a first down, instead of singing first down, it's going to be some symbol. And it's just, I'm telling you, I don't see the upside in hacking off fans the way you are. And I think that they just think, oh, the fans will put up with it because they always have. They're taking it to new levels. And that's the tie-in that I wanted to make with regard to the revelation now that we now understand that the Democrats will not stop rioters from rioting. They will not protect us. They're just going to allow Portland to go on apparently forever until the members of Antifa die. They weren't going to stop Kenosha. It was Donald Trump getting the feds in there and the people of Kenosha demanding that we get a decent response after the mayor sat in his can and the governor sat in his can for 3 full days. News Talk 1130 WYSN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. An interesting story today out of Whitewater. The chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater has been suspended. They've placed him on leave. There's an investigation into a complaint, and nobody's saying what the complaint is. This appears to be one of those jobs I've been talking about, how Tom Barrack can't keep a Milwaukee health commissioner, that everybody that he chooses is a disaster. Jeanette Kwolek is crawling out of town now after basically using the job as a way of getting health insurance to get her knees done, and then bitching that she couldn't lock down even more of us with regard to the COVID thing. She follows a disastrous interim director who had to be replaced, and she followed Bevan Baker, a guy who served in the position for a decade, was given millions in public funds to combat lead poisoning, and we found out that the department didn't do any lead abatement at all during his tenure there. Well, Whitewater is the university that had Beverly Copper as chancellor. She gives a job to her husband, Pete Hill, an unpaid job in which he's some sort of, what did she call him anyway? It was like, he was like some sort of ambassador or something or another, but it turns out he was like accused of sexually harassing women. Then, I mean, his whole reason, I think, but Pete's being ambassadorship consisted of was being able to hang around on a college campus and ogle women. And they finally got her out of that job. So now they brought in this guy, Dwight Watson. He was only hired a year ago. He came on August of last year, and now he's suspended. Remember, Tommy Thompson is the interim president of the UW system. I don't know if whatever it is that they're looking into, that the past leadership of the system was aware of and was sweeping under the rug, and Thompson's not going to sweep it under the rug, or if they brought something to his attention. Now, when you hear the problem when they say that we're investigating something and don't say what it is, some people think, well, is it sexual? Other people wonder, is it money? Other people wonder, is it some violation of university policy? Did he, remember all these chancellors during the last era had those slush funds that they had all these unallocated funds, but the regents knew about it, and the system knew about all that money that was laying around. So again, I don't know if it's money. I don't know if it's in an appropriate relationship. I don't know if he's accused of, wrong language toward a subordinate. I don't know that we do anybody any favors and we don't say what it is that you're looking into, on the other hand, until you draw a conclusion one way or another as to whether the guy did it. I get why you don't throw it out there, but there's rumors swirling around all over the place, but unless I can confirm one of them, I won't say anything. But and Paul says he likes it. I don't know why Tommy Thompson took that job. The University of Wisconsin system, especially the COVID thing, is going to accelerate the pace, needs to be downsized. It needs to be downsized because there is going to be a crash in student enrollment. The declining enrollment that we have seen in the high school and elementary level because of the crash in the birth rate is going to be hitting the universities. And we just can't sustain the kind of budgets that are premised on having the enrollment we've had in the past. Then you add to that I believe that many young people of college age, and that's a smaller pool to begin with because of what I just said, are going to opt away from college education altogether. And then just the whole cesspool of political correctness and the fact that they've become radical indoctrination camps. What needs to be done with the University of Wisconsin is you just scrap it and start over again with about 12 campuses, get rid of most of them, and so on. Well, Tommy can't do that, and there's no political will to do it, and the downsizing of the universities across, it's not just going to be Wisconsin, it's going to be everywhere, is going to be a 10, 20, 30, and 40-year process. The only thing they have going for them is they've already done most of their building. The thing that's going to kill the elementary schools is they've done, Wauwatosa as an example, they've done all this building by passing this referendum right as they're moving into a period of probably 30 years of declining enrollment and therefore no financial ability to pay for it. And the fact that they have advertised that we don't really need school buildings in the first place, that we could do it all virtual, and their teaching staffs have exposed themselves as a bunch of liberal hacks who are afraid of actually going into work and encountering students. These are all problems that they're facing, but the university, they've done all their building and build these edifices and so on. Most of the stuff has been in place for a long, long time. I'm not saying that there isn't any construction that's going on, but we're facing decades of confronting the fact that universities all over the country are grotesquely overbuilt for a population in which the birth rate, I just don't see. I don't think that that's going to reverse. The only thing that Latino families have babies at a higher rate than white families and so on. But other than that, there's nothing out there that would indicate that we're going to suddenly go back to people producing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. I mean, you have tons of millennials who aren't going to have any children. And then those that do, maybe 1 or 2. And as I say, this is already in the elementary schools, and it may be a permanent phenomenon in America that those families of, okay, we've got 7 kids, 4 of them went to Madison, 2 went to UWM, and 1 went off to Notre Dame, that's just all a thing of the past. And we just aren't going to have the need for probably at least half these universities and at least half their staffs and much of their buildings and so on. And you add into that the fact that the teaching staffs are so biased and the problems associated with the overbuilding are so severe. Of all the jobs in the state of Wisconsin to take, I don't think Tommy should have taken that one, but he'll certainly be better than what they had before, and he's going to be better than what they have after that. As to what the problem is at Whitewater, I think Whitewater just might be in a situation now where they're doomed to get one rotten chancellor after another. Well, we're certainly seeing a washout in the economy, and you wonder, will restaurants ever come back? I mean, it's just stunning how many in Milwaukee have closed. And the big problem is that, in every city, where are most of the restaurants? Downtown. And the downtowns don't have any people in them because the office buildings have closed. So you have people who work in downtown office buildings. This isn't just Milwaukee. This is all over the United States. They're scattered in all the places that people live. So if they were going to go out to dinner, why would they go all the way to the downtown where they work? Now, some people live downtown, but that's not enough to be a basis for all of these restaurants. And then you add, often when people go to dinner, they usually dinner in a movie or dinner in a basketball game or dinner in a play or dinner in a sporting good. All those things are called off. And whatever they're able to make up in the whole delivery thing, even when you do the delivery, you're not selling any booze, which is the biggest markup item. Booze and desserts, I think I've heard. Do you know anything about this? You were in the restaurant business. You didn't sell booze, though, did you? You operated, what'd you call it? The Dairy Dump or whatever it was? Dairy Dump, huh? The Dairy Delight. Well, I like alliteration. I ought to make fun of that name. Delite, because what? Your stuff was light? I thought you sold custard in there. Well, play out. Well, then why didn't you spell delight the way you're supposed to spell it? Oh, it's a franchise. There were 3 in the country. You thought that maybe this is going to be the next McDonald's, and instead 3 in America, and 1 was in Random Lake. Oh, is it Plymouth? Oh, well, that was a strategic decision. Let's get to Plymouth. We're going to go to the big city. I make fun of it. It's probably wonderful. You have like a grease, you fry your burgers in butter and you put it on a grill. It's on a grill. All right. I don't, the whole COVID reaction to all of this, I think you're going to see that the industries that are hurt the most are going to be, again, the ones that liberals care about the most. I mean, I love going to restaurants, but let's be honest. I mean, these chefs and restaurant managers and so on, I mean, this is mostly a liberal kind of thing. You saw in Milwaukee when it was the restaurant owners themselves that were pushing the mask mandates, not understanding that the thing that's keeping a lot of people from wanting to go out in places like Milwaukee is that they feel as though they have to wear masks, not understanding that if you sit down at the table and get something in front of you right away, there's no requirement to keep the mask on. So, I know, but I don't think a lot of people still understand that because they have to wear the mask in order to come in, and they have to wear the mask while they're waiting, and they have to wear the mask until they sit down. But once you're served, as long as you're consuming drink or beverage, you could take it off. But I mean, I just know that this summer, after places reopened, a lot of them were doing really well. And all the operators have told me the moment the mask thing came in, that's when they were killed. And the restaurant operators all thought, well, our people are afraid to come in, but if they know that everybody's wearing a mask, then they're going to come in. And that's not been what's happened. You said Door County was crazy busy. Did don't name a place. Did all the staff have masks on? The staff did. See, and the defenders of this say, well, it's mostly always just been to keep the staff. The staff have to put the masks on, but I don't see again what the end game on this is, especially given that these downtown office towers they're empty. And again, this is a national phenomenon. New York is an example. How many restaurants are going to be left in New York? All those restaurants in Manhattan. Now, the one difference there they have is the people in Manhattan, many live in Manhattan. So they're still close, but most cities, you have some people who live in a downtown, but otherwise they're scattered all over the place. And we've seen this summer that out in the lake country, restaurants have done very well. A, going out to the lake area is one of the few things you're allowed to do. And B, that's where many of those people live. So why go to the downtown? And the downtown places have been closed. All right. I said I wanted to share with you. I often share with the audience Daniel Henninger's columns in the Wall Street Journal. He writes on Thursday. He makes a point, but you've got to go through his introduction in order to get to it. But the point is critical. It piggybacks off what I was talking about in the first hour in discussing Biden and discussing the reason I think the presidential campaign has turned is that many Americans now know that it isn't just rhetoric for somebody like me to say that the Democrats won't protect you. When they talk about defunding the police, they literally don't want there to be police, and if there's a riot, they aren't going to stop it. And that is what they actually believe in. Biden is still far more concerned about the shooting that occurred of a criminal in Kenosha, which may or may not be wrongful. That thing is still being investigated. That he is about the fact that an entire city, that a huge chunk, it's not fair to say entire, huge chunks of a city were burned to the ground. Doesn't seem to bother Biden at all. And that little prattling that you heard from here, did you hear him talk at all about the buildings burned? Nothing. He talked about, went on forever and ever and ever about all the members of the Blake family that he talked to, and then, is it possible they do have to drug Joe? But I would think that the drugs he would need would be those to wake him up, not to make him even more tired. You said, Paul says, the energy difference between him and Trump is I know, but you're taking with Trump, maybe the most energetic man in his 70s on the planet, and in Joe Biden, the least energetic man in his 90s on the planet. All right. The Henninger column makes a point that all of this buildup that I'm giving it is going to be worth it. And I want to talk here about, I think, a divide that is existing in this country that is not breachable. Beautiful Labor Day weekend coming up, and then almost on cue. I always consider Labor Day the unofficial end of summer. Autumn's going to start Tuesday because it's going to get much cooler next week. But tonight, clear skies with temperatures dropping all the way down to 53 for a low. Bouncing right back tomorrow into the upper 70s under sunny skies. Saturday, same thing, mostly sunny, high 77. Sunday, showers and thunderstorms likely, highs still in the mid-70s. Monday, Labor Day itself, increasing clouds with a chance for thunderstorms, high of 77. We're only going to see 60s for highs on Tuesday and Wednesday, and by the tail end of next week, they're talking about 40s at night. Daniel Henninger's column in the Wall Street Journal about the culture wars being back. In this case, the culture wars are not about sexual morality or drugs or some of the things that we've argued about in the past. But instead, it's about whether or not we are the type of country that is going to insist on law and order, or if we're going to be a country that is going to simply be embroiled in chaos, violence, and riots. Let me pick up the middle of Henninger's column. He writes, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton made the tactical error of identifying the culture war's losers as deplorables, and enough of them stirred to hoist Donald Trump into the presidency. This election wasn't going to be about the culture. Just over 3 months ago, it was about one thing: Trump. Democrats wanted to make the president alone the main voting issue, and that's the focus Trump himself prefers. Then a hurricane happened May 25th on a Minneapolis street. In its aftermath, the election, incredibly, is now about Portland. And he puts Portland in quotation marks. Quote-unquote Portland has become a proxy for nearly 100 days of nationwide street marches, riots, smashed historical monuments, fires, lootings, shootings, the rise of Black Lives Matter, and the embattled cops in multiple cities enduring a hail of rocks and industrial-grade fireworks. As the guy in Queens said, what happened? Trump has blasted Portland, Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler as a fool, do-nothing, and wacky. Instead, he should make Wheeler the honorary co-chair of the Trump re-election campaign. Long faded are daily mainstream media obsessions over Russia collusion, the Mueller investigation, Adam Schiff's hearings, and impeachment. The coronavirus pandemic alone would have been enough for voters to sort out, but the list of 2020 voting issues now includes civil order and whether the police protect or impede it, the meaning of, quote, crime, novel interpretations of America's founding history, patriotism, free speech as a right versus cancel culture as a social necessity, even the Second Amendment right to bear arms, as when your life's business is being torched. Joe Biden and most Democrats would not have chosen this course, but the left loves the culture war, so it's back. Americans are normally slow to alter political loyalties, but, and this is the point that's critical, do I get what he said? Americans are normally slow to alter political loyalties. Even in my own case, it took me years to fully move from being a liberal to a conservative. Americans are normally slow to alter political loyalties, but what has tipped the scale is the daily display of incompetent progressive governance. In just 3 months, public officials in city after city have shown themselves incapable of executing the minimal responsibilities of government. Some don't even seem interested, as with Mayor Wheeler in Portland, or New York City's Bill de Blasio. I would add Wauwatosa's Dennis McBride, Milwaukee's John Norquist, Sacha Conway in Madison, Lori Lightfoot in Chicago. These are all mayors who have shown literally no interest in maintaining basic civil responsibility of enforcing the law. This is me and not Henninger, back to his column. Until this, the left existed in some minds as being about banning fossil fuels or conservative speakers on campus. Yawn. Bernie Sanders' socialism could once be minimized as a hard-to-achieve economic reorganization. But today, The ruin of great swaths of American cities is real. And it's justified daily by the Democratic left as a social revolution that the U.S. needs right now amidst battling COVID. The Trump campaign saw the political implications of these events and created an impressive convention about getting back to basics with substantive, well-written speeches by everyday people, including black Americans dissenting from the Democrats' now conventional wisdom of Black Lives Matter. The left canceled Francis Scott Key, so the Republicans did Star-Spangled Banner patriotism. Before this, the culture war had been effectively lost because the left, with the support of America's opinion-forming platforms, got acquiescence for their views from so many major institutions. Still, there is no bigger institution than the American city, and the Democratic left has let civilian life itself degrade. Nor is there much evidence it sees any limits on disorder as a political tool. Because of these disturbing events and the ideas attached to them, it appears that some anti-Trump independents, suburbanites, and centrist Democrats are reconsidering where their own interests lie. That's a segment of Dan Henninger's column in the Wall Street Journal. It was a point that I was making earlier in the program. It is not a reach to call the Democrats the pro-riot party. You can find almost none of them who condemn it. They certainly have made it clear that the anti-police party, given that the overwhelming majority of them support defunding the police. Remember, there was only one no vote in the Milwaukee Common Council for it. We have seen in most cities no attempt to stop loud protests from degenerating into violence and riots. We've seen several instances in Chicago of out-and-out destruction of large portions of their beautiful downtown with no attempt by the city of Chicago to stop that. We saw in Kenosha that when everyone knew a terrible riot was likely coming, the governor of Wisconsin, Democrat, did nothing to stop it. You likewise see every single night numerous ordinances and a handful of laws broken in Wauwatosa, all by Democrats, with the Democratic mayor refusing to do anything about it and no Democratic leader condemning it, and several Democratic public officials, including members of the state assembly, participating in it. So this isn't me just exaggerating a point. There has been almost no condemnation of the Kenosha rioting from Democrats. Virtually none of them will even use the word. There has been virtually no condemnation of the uncivil behavior in Wauwatosa. Even Democrats, while changing their approach to the violence in Madison after they almost burned down the city jail building, they haven't condemned it. If they don't condemn it, even after we have seen all this damage and even after it has turned public opinion against them, that means they don't intend really ever to stop it. Rioting is now the new normal because one of the two political parties doesn't believe in stopping it once it occurs. I think that's the type of issue that turns public opinion. Now, on this tactic of trying to move some of this stuff away from the big cities and into medium-sized cities like Kenosha, Wauwatosa, so on, Fort Collins, Colorado's been having problems. It's clear to me that rioting is unpopular among African Americans. There's a new poll that's out today that's extraordinary. We finally, by the way, have a presidential poll out. It has shown, just in the last 2 weeks, an extraordinary spike in President Trump's numbers among both African Americans and Latinos. Again, the poll might be an outlier, and I'll admit that I don't really buy their numbers myself. It just seems too, I guess, good to be true. But the poll shows that 28% of African Americans say they intend to vote for President Trump. Republican candidate usually gets about 7. If Trump gets to 15 or 17, he wins the election. Because the African American vote being virtually unanimous is the margin in many of these close battleground states, especially in the upper Midwest. It's a vote that the Democrats have to have all of in order to have a chance to win. The reason to believe that there might be some reality to the number, however, the people who have to deal the most with mayhem, chaos, and so on are African Americans and Latinos. They live in the neighborhoods that have the most chaos and the most crime. It's not a given that all blacks support Black Lives Matter. It is not a given that most blacks want fewer police. If this issue is turning some, and again, 28% isn't 88%, it's still only 1/4 of blacks, but it's the highest number a Republican has had in decades. If this behavior we've seen over the last several months and the embrace of the increasing radicalism of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and the knowledge now that Democratic elected officials will not protect you and will not stop protests and rioting even when numerous laws are violated, if that's moving some blacks and Latinos, how do you think it's moving some of these swing voting suburbanites? So as I say, I think there's a real reason that Biden came to Kenosha. He realizes that his campaign realizes that they're losing ground and they have to come out there and confront it, but he's still off message. I talked on yesterday's program about, and maybe Biden, they'll try to do it with Biden out of desperation. They still have 2 months to go. That Sister Souljah moment that helped define Bill Clinton, in which he went after an African-American female rapper and ripped her hard for her pro-violence, anti-police message. If Joe Biden would break from the Democratic Party, for example, and condemn Antifa, condemn the mayor of Portland, or if he would have done something like today, come into Wisconsin and blast Tony Evers saying, I look and I see these buildings that have burned out. I mean, I wonder, for crying out loud, do you have a governor here? I think that could change the election and would make Biden appear to be something that he's not, which is a different type of Democrat. But they're incapable of doing that, because it would mean alienating the majority of their party, because it's pretty evident to me that the majority of Democrats must support this because none of them are criticizing it. And this point that I've made that's circled through the entire program, find 5 prominent Wisconsin Democrats who specifically and with passion, not a little buzz statement, well, I don't condone, condemned the rioting in Kenosha. It won't occur, just as you can't find any United States Senate Democrats condemning 100 days of rioting and anarchy in Portland. And the reason you don't see it is they're not against it. Henninger put, I believe that a significant chunk of liberals, including the majority of the people who run the Democratic Party, think this is good, this is what this country needs, we need to burn the baby down in order to get the change we want. Get rid of the cops, get rid of this, that, and the other thing. Okay, fine. Thanks for telling us. Now we know. Here's the 11:30 WISN Mark Belling late afternoon show. We had the 3 o'clock winner in the Season Summer Cash Contest. That's 2 days in a row. winner on this program. I said we should get another winner today. Well, we pull it off. Two in a row this week. Winner on Wednesday's show and a winner on today's show. Christopher Andrich of Hartford was the 3 o'clock winner. Still 2 more chances to win, including right now. 5 o'clock hour word. You have until 6 o'clock to text the following word in to 200-200. The word is bills. BILLS. Anytime between now and 6, text that to 200-200. You get a text confirming entry. Plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. We've been talking a lot about the situation in Wauwatosa, which, as I said, is 50-50 to degenerate into Kenosha. Wauwatosa has chosen to establish no limits at all, and things that law-abiding citizens would not be allowed to do: stand in the middle of the street, block traffic, blow your horn all night, shoot off fireworks illegally. Somebody just decided to do that, some neighborhood on the west side, the cops would come. Instead, they've been tolerating this behavior night after night after night, and the mayor on the city came on my show Tuesday and said, I just don't want to inflame anybody. Anyway, there are signs that are now popping up in Wauwatosa for people disgusted with this, and they read, for sale. Unless politicians keep Tosa safe, paid for by Tosa taxpayers fed up with mayor and city council. Now, after that thing came out, there's been some racist letters that have been sent around Wauwatosa thanking the people for putting this up, saying, yeah, we white people have to stay together. Nobody knows where they came from, and so on. But it does show that there is a deeply divided community here, and the likelihood is going to be that lots and lots of people are going to leave if they don't see an end game from the city on restoring order into the community. One of the points that I made on yesterday's program is that elections have consequences. And when people do all this bringing up, well, let's recall this one, recall that one, recall the other one, it ought to be, if you didn't know it before, you ought to know it now. If you elect a liberal, this is what you're going to get. I admit it's a new concept. Liberal leaders, conservative leaders have generally tried to maintain some level of order in a community. You wouldn't think it would be in the interest of in the interest, for example, of Portland to allow its city to become what it is. You wouldn't have thought that it would have been in the interest of San Francisco to have thousands and thousands of people living on the street, defecating, urinating, vomiting. You wouldn't have thought that it would have been in the interest of Seattle to allow people to set up their own anarchy zone. Just as you wouldn't think that it would have been in the interest of Tony Evers and the people who run Kenosha to allow Kenosha to be flattened. And you wouldn't think that it would be in the interest of Wauwatosa to have that community a miserable place to have to try to live every single night of the week. But it is, because that's the choice that's made by liberal leaders. So if you weren't aware of that before, you need to be aware of it before the next election so you don't run around after the fact, try to recall somebody who in fact was elected. Dennis McBride was elected in Wauwatosa only a few months ago. And he was the same lefty when he was running that he is now. Admittedly, I do think that there are many people that are shocked to find the level of overt support for antisocial protesting, including all the way up to violent rioting, that you see occurring right now from the left. Whether or not it is under the guise of people claiming that they're objecting to police violence or not, doesn't really matter. What matters is that people are now seeing liberal politicians and what they believe in a very new light. So is this the big downturn after the huge summer rally in the stock market? Who knows? I don't know. If I knew, I'd tell you, but I don't know. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. One thing, I'll stay on the stock market for a second. The one thing that hasn't happened really now for years is they use the term called rotation, where one sector of the market goes from being leaders and then another sector and another sector and another sector, and the market tends to work that way. For example, you'd be in a period of time in which cyclical stocks are doing the best, and then technology stocks are doing the best, and then financial stocks are doing the best, and then consumer goods are doing the best, and so on. This market now for years has been led by the technology stocks, with everybody else kind of lagging. I mean, if you're involved in a mutual fund that focuses on so-called value stocks, that thing has been in the crapper for 3 years. Some of them are still negative for the year. And if you're especially into like the small capitalization value stocks, they've done nothing. They've been awful. The market has been driven now for several years by the really large capitalization technology stocks and the companies that are involved in really any area of the technology sector. But other companies are just sitting around doing nothing. Other stocks have been tanking. It may well be that what we're seeing here is that these tech stocks, the big giant companies, Microsoft, Amazon, you know the list, Apple, they've just gotten way overvalued. Not that they're not great companies, but that their stock price is finally so far over the top that they're going to sell off and come back down to earth and maybe come down 25, 30, 40, 50%. Some of these stocks have price earnings ratios. I think Amazon's like 150 or something. Numbers that are not sustainable. So maybe what we're going to see here is a move into some of these value stocks that have been nowhere forever. And the people that have been pushing them, our day's going to come. And usually it does. And maybe that's what we're moving into in the market. Let's turn our attention to the coronavirus. An interesting tweet from Alex Berenson. It follows up on a story that appeared in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago. I've been mentioning, I keep tabs on the mainstream media to see when stories start to turn. And I've been commenting on how the New York Times has now run 2 or 3 stories here questioning whether or not the lockdowns have gone too far and the permanent damage to the economy is too much to overcome, and have we thrown the baby out with the bathwater? In other words, suggesting maybe it's time for sports to resume. You're now seeing Big Ten football teams talking about resuming in October rather than next spring. The overwhelming pressure in so many areas to get the schools open without regard to the crybabying of the faculties. The Wall Street Journal, as I said, ran a story a couple of days ago in which they are now contending that the lockdowns and the reaction to coronavirus not only did nothing to slow the spread of the virus, but it caused numerous other health problems. Alex Berenson put out the following tweet, and I'm going to quote it. 1, PCR tests sharply overstate how many people have SARS-CoV-2, in other words, COVID. So that's the first point that he's trying to make. The media keeps reporting on the positive tests, but we know that so many of these positive tests are false positives. Look at the number of professional athletes, pro football players. They're testing them all the time right now. They test positive, and 2 days later, they get to return to practice. Who was the latest one? There's a jockey that's going to participate in the Kentucky Derby on Saturday. He tested positive for COVID on Tuesday. Looks like he'd be done for the week. His second test came in, and he was fine. He was clear. So the point that's being raised here is, since the media reports every positive test as a case, they're overstating how many people have COVID. That's a key point. You need to get that. Many of the positive tests turn out to be negative tests 2 days later, but they don't take that number down. Let's imagine, is everybody understanding my point on this, or do I need to explain it longer? They're getting my point? What is my point? I should explain it. My point is this. Many positive tests are not COVID cases. Example, let's use a guinea pig. You want it to be you or me? You. Paul goes in for a COVID test, tests positive. He is now on the list of positive COVID people. He comes back 2 days later. It's usually 1 or 2 days. He's negative. And he's negative again. It was just a false positive. But his number is still on there in cases, even though he didn't have it. This has skewed the numbers from the beginning. A positive test becomes a case. I've been struggling to make this point to the audience forever. They are referring to cases, but they're counting tests. So that's the first point that Berenson makes. The tests are sharply overstating how many people have it. In other words, he's pointing out a lot fewer people have it than the number of people that tested positive. Second, states use those tests to assign deaths from COVID. If many people are falsely positive, real COVID-related deaths must be lower than the reported figure. Now, what does that mean? Let's use Paul as the guinea pig again. Paul tests positive for COVID. 3 days later, Paul dies. He's going to be reported as a COVID death, right? What if his COVID test was a false positive? Let's imagine now Paul also had diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, and 6 or 7 other things. He was just going to die. But he did get a positive COVID test 3 days earlier. Since we know that many of the positive COVID tests are in fact people who don't have COVID, just false positives, that means the number of deaths attributed to COVID is also off. Berenson's point. He then writes, early on, many excess deaths occurred in nursing homes in New York, Massachusetts, etc. Those deaths were often assigned to COVID, even without positive tests. Let me interject. Remember, they didn't have the test initially. They just assumed that a lot of the people that were dying in the nursing homes had COVID. Berenson thinks that those numbers got inflated too. He continues. But care was disrupted. This is his point about the damage then. Remember, when all those people were dying in the nursing homes in New York and Massachusetts, one of the things that happened, they disrupted care. Some people likely died because they weren't being fed, etc. Family members have reported this to me. The lack of feeding even happened in hospitals, or so family members have said. Remember, families were blocked from seeing patients, and medical staff were terrified. Since April, nursing homes and hospitals are doing better. We now know the testing is leading to some deaths that have nothing to do with COVID to be classified as COVID. So the point that he's making, he thinks that period in March and April when the COVID death toll was so high, that was inflated with a bunch of bad numbers. That's why we still have all these COVID cases now, but nowhere near as many deaths. He thinks that way too many people who died were being attributed to COVID than actually had it. He continues. The CDC's 6% COVID death figure is a perfect example of a wrong story being right. The 9,000 figure is too low, of course. That's the number of people who died without having any other condition other than COVID. But after 6 months of media hysteria, many people are wondering why they don't know anyone who has died or even gotten seriously ill from COVID. Now, I've been making that point for months, as you know. I said, if I was 80 years old and I lived in New York City, I'd probably know a lot of people who had COVID. But I have been commenting forever that I'm a guy who knows a lot of people in a lot of walks of life. Remember, I'm involved in horse racing. I go to Illinois for this, that, and the other thing. And plus just people that I encounter going into the bars. I live downtown. I work in the suburbs. Know people from the state. I'm not saying friends with a zillion people, but I know of many people. I am to this day, unless somebody's gotten it that I don't know about it, I know one person who's gotten coronavirus. I've heard of a few people that tested positive and then they were negative 2 days later. And a lot of people keep pointing that out. If there's all this incredible thing, how come so many of us don't know or only know 1, 2, 3 people that have it? Well, this explains it. The numbers have been inflated by false positive tests. The person finds out 2 days later they don't have it, but they're in there with these numbers that blow up. And then the death toll. Somebody that was probably terminal anyway test positive for COVID, they count it as a COVID death, whereas their family members don't consider it a COVID death. Well, just old Uncle Joe was dying. Berenson continues. They have known all along. The very first U.S. patients with SARS-CoV-2 found that the virus was easily detectable after an 18 to 20 PCR cycles on swabs taken on day 4, even though he had only mild symptoms. Not 40, not 30, fewer than 20. And the European CDC warned publicly in July that any test result from over 35 cycles could be due to contamination of reagents. In other words, simple lab error. So the point that Berenson is making is that we have been dealing with bad data from the beginning, that we have been going off of test results, and the test results have been all over the map and wildly inaccurate, producing way too many false positives. The result, however, of these positive tests is the positive tests have been driving the governmental policy reaction. Why did they tell us we have to put on the mask? Well, there's all these positive tests. You have to go shut this back down, close these bars back in Florida. There's all these positive tests. We keep using the test as the barometer for public policy. This leads to the Wall Street Journal story, the failed experiment of COVID lockdowns. The Wall Street Journal opinion piece says, we have tried now on mass scale, locking down and shutting down things to see if it's going to do anything to slow the spread of a virus. And the conclusion of the Wall Street Journal is that the lockdown experiment has failed. In other words, they're essentially saying, let's open everything back up. What I've detected before I get into this piece is there may be a consensus developing that the masks are going to be with us for a long time, but also a consensus developing that it's time to end all the lockdowns. In other words, open everything back up, but make us keep wearing the damn masks forever. That might be the new direction they're going to take us in. And remember, that's what liberals do. They just change on a dime, never admit they're wrong, just go to the next thing. The next thing probably just as stupid as the last one, but a new and different one. So that's my prediction. At some point, they're going to finally realize that the lockdowns are based on bad numbers. But they're going to need to justify continuing to do something, so maybe the full embrace of the mask becomes it. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal piece by Donald Luskin. He writes, 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. By the way, I should point out, we cannot link up Wall Street Journal pieces on Belling.com because they are behind a paywall over there. So if you want to find it, you either need to be a subscriber or find one of the sites that reprints sites that are behind copyrighted paywalls, but we can't do it. Anyway, he writes, 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States has now carried out 2 large-scale experiments in public health. First, in March and April, the lockdown of the economy to arrest the spread of the virus. And second, since mid-April, the reopening of the economy. The results are in. Counterintuitive though it may be, statistical analysis shows that locking down the economy did not contain the disease's spread, and reopening it did not unleash a second wave of infections. Now, let me interject. All the times we've been told, just in Wisconsin, just think of the last few major incidents in which you were told, oh my God, they're going to do this, there's going to be an outbreak of COVID, and where it didn't happen. The biggest one I can think of, the April election. Oh my God, they're having in-person voting. There's going to be an explosion of COVID. Remember? Nothing happened. The most recent, Sturgis. Oh my God, all these people went out to Sturgis. They're going to come back. Everybody's going to get COVID and they're going to spread it all over the country. Didn't happen. I think the conclusion is obvious. Locking things down and stopping people from doing things doesn't have anything to do with the virus being spread. Back to the column. Consider, let me expand on that point. I will continue to argue that it is packing everybody in close quarters and restricting their activity that spreads the virus, not having people go about their daily activities in which they are all scattered amidst one another. I think it is people on top of one another, close physical contact, etc., that results in the virus being spread. I do not think casual contact like going to work or going to Sturgis or going to vote has anything to do with this. And I believe that my side can be proven by virtue of what has happened here. Now, Luton's point in his column, Luskin's point in the column is, when we did all of the shutdowns, that's when COVID was exploding. Since we've reopened the economy, we've had just this steady number of flatline cases forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Reopening hasn't harmed anything. So if you reopen even more, that's not going to harm anything either. He continues, considering that lockdowns are economically costly and create well-documented long-term public health consequences beyond COVID, the point I have made forever. Even if you think that lockdowns are going to slow the spread of COVID, what about all the health problems that have occurred because of the lockdowns? Imposing them appears to have been a large policy error. At the beginning, when little was known, officials acted in ways they thought prudent. But now, evidence proves that lockdowns were an expensive treatment with serious side effects and no benefit to society. Trend Macro, my analytics firm, tallied the cumulative number of reported cases of COVID-19 in each state in the District of Columbia as a percentage of the population based on data from state and local health departments aggregated by the COVID Tracking Project. We then compared that with the timing and intensity of the lockdowns in each jurisdiction. In other words, they took all the numbers from all 50 states. Remember, not everybody locked down at the same rate as others. Some barely locked down, some totally locked down. So he said they went and they compared how extensive the lockdown was and then matched that against what the actual COVID numbers were in these areas, picking up at his point. That is, we then compared that with the timing and intensity of the lockdown in each jurisdiction. That is measured not by the mandates put in place by government officials, but rather by observing what people in each jurisdiction actually did along with their baseline behavior before the lockdown. This is captured in a highly detailed, anonymized cell phone tracking data provided by Google and others and tabulated by the University of Maryland's Transportation Institute into a social distancing index. Measuring from the start of the year to each state's point of maximum lockdown, which ranged from April 5th to April 18th, it turns out that lockdown correlated with greater spread of the virus. Do you hear what I just said? Lockdowns correlated with greater spreads of the virus. Now, I can explain this because I've been explaining it all along when, well, what's your public health degree in? I'm just a guy with common sense. Take New York City as an example. They all live in dense housing. Packing them all in their housing with shared elevators, even the row houses where everything's next to one another, all together, nobody ever leaving. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to spread the virus more than if they actually got out of these places and moved around. Similarly, look at the central city of Milwaukee, which was the area that had a really bad outbreak of COVID again during this period of time. Nobody was allowed to go to work. Nobody could go to the bars. Nobody could go to the restaurants. In the inner city, you have the densest housing stock that we have in Milwaukee. I guess also the near south side. People on top of one another. A lot of people living in the same home. Guess what happened? That's where it spiked. Workplaces that have remained open like a chunk of ours here, there's no spike, there's no cases. Again, this piece is suggesting that they have tracked the rate of lockdown with the rate of cases, and they found that the greatest instance of COVID being spread was when there were strong lockdowns in place, picking up the piece. States with longer, stricter lockdowns also had larger COVID outbreaks. The 5 places with the harshest lockdowns, D.C., New York, Michigan, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, had the heaviest caseloads. Duh! It could be that strict lockdowns were imposed as a response to already severe outbreaks. But the surprising negative correlation, while statistically weak, persists even when excluding states with the heaviest caseloads. It makes no difference if the analysis includes other potential explanatory factors such as population density, age, ethnicity, prevalence of nursing homes, general health, or temperature. The only factor that seems to make a demonstrable difference is the intensity of... Everybody fill in the blank. What is the one factor that they're able to find that seems to have a relationship to whether or not you're going to get hit hard with COVID? Now, I know that this is Mark Belling patting himself on the back. From the beginning of this, what did I tell you is the factor that is in place everywhere you've got a significant outbreak of COVID? I'll go back to the sentence and see how many of you can fill in the blank. The only factor that seems to make a demonstrable difference is the intensity of mass transit use. What have I been telling you for months? The one thing in Milwaukee that we didn't shut down, The one thing that they were determined in New York and other places to keep running. We learned this in the beginning when we saw the concentration of New York cases around the subway stations. Again, what is mass transit? It is ultimately a lockdown. You're locking people into these vehicles, into these buses, or in the cases of subways where they're stuck in there, packed together in very, very close spaces. That's not what occurs in general life. I've said from the beginning, if there was one thing we should have shut down, maybe we should have shut down all the buses. It's the one area where there is obviously likely transmission and where you clearly can't sanitize every time somebody gets on and off. All these experts making fun of people like me. And again, I was merely observing what was happening. Look at in Milwaukee. Where did we have the worst outbreaks? In the areas where you have the highest percentage of people who use mass transit. Back to the piece. We also ran the experiment a second time to observe the effects on caseloads of the reopening that began in mid-April. We used the same methodology but started from each state's peak of lockdown and extended to July 31st. Confirming the first experiment, there was a tendency for states that opened up the most to have the lightest caseloads. Again, what did he just say? The states that came most wide open when they reopened, they had the lightest caseloads, not the biggest. Remember all the people, oh my God, they're opening wide up, there's going to be a terrible outbreak. Just the opposite. Why? Again, locking it down spread the virus because lockdown, look, I can think of my own life. You know what people that the circle of people that I'm around, you know what we were doing during the lockdown period, March, April, May, and so on? People were having house parties. And people were coming, in other words, packed together, shared surface. And even if you weren't having a house party, the families were stuck together the whole time. You know, maybe Uncle Joe comes on over, packed into that same thing day after day after day after day after day. Spreading everybody out and getting everybody outside results in less ability to transmit the virus. It's no different, I think, than any other community. Family of 5. One kid gets the flu. What happens to the rest of the family? They get the flu! Again, the piece suggests that the states that opened up the most had the lowest instances of further development of the virus. Continuing. Confirming the first experiment, there was the tendency for states that opened up the most to have the lightest caseload. The states that had the biggest summer flare-up in the so-called Sunbelt second wave, Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas, are by no means the most opened up, politicized headlines notwithstanding. In other words, they say, well, they opened it all wide open in Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas. He's saying those weren't the most wide open states. The states that came most wide open were states like Wyoming, South Dakota, some of the others. Wisconsin became a very wide open state after our Supreme Court ruling. We've never had a spike. The piece continues from Luskin. The lesson is not that lockdowns made the spread of COVID-19 worse, although the raw evidence might suggest that, but that lockdowns probably did not help and opening up didn't hurt. This defies common sense. In theory, the spread of an infectious disease ought to be controllable by quarantine. Evidently not in practice, though we are aware of no researcher who understands why not. We're not the only researchers to have discovered this statistical relationship. We first published a version of these findings in April around the same time. Similar findings appeared in these pages. In July, a publication of The Lancet published research that found similar results looking across countries rather than United States. A longer time prior to implementation of any lockdown was associated with lower number of detected cases, that study concluded. Those findings have now been enhanced by sophisticated measures of actual social distancing and data from the reopening phase. There are experimental controls that all this research lacks. There are no observable increases in which there were either total lockdowns or no lockdown at all. But there's no escaping the evidence that, at minimum, heavy lockdowns were no more effective than light ones, and that opening up a lot was no more harmful than opening up a little. So where's the science that would justify the heavy lockdowns many public health officials are still demanding? With the evidence we now possess, even the most risk-averse and single-minded public health officials should hesitate before demanding the next lockdown and causing the next economic recession. So all these quacks like you got up there in Ozaukee, Washington, and all these other health directors, again, when they kept telling us to follow the science is now coming in. Lockdowns don't do a damn bit of good. It's hard, Paul, being right all the time. And again, I didn't know I was right. All along throughout this, I said, I might be wrong. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. But we were observing with our own eyes that when we were most locked down was the time the virus was spiking the most. And when we finally opened up, nothing happened. I do think this. And again, it's just based on me observing what's going on. It seems to me that the virus is likeliest to be transmitted during really close personal contact, not he's over here, I'm over here, not 5 of us are at an office building. I think it's when you're hugging somebody, you're kissing somebody. Sex. This to me, my big revelation was the Mardi Gras thing in New Orleans. Everybody, not everybody, virtually everybody goes to Mardi Gras, ends up having sex, and a lot of people are having sex with strangers. Well, think about just stating the obvious, what an easy way to transmit an infectious disease with exchange of bodily fluids. And I don't want to get gross here, but that just was such an explanatory thing to me. Then, what's the other kind of thing? Really close personal contact. You've been in New York. Were you on the subway when you were in New York? It's the most packed, dense environment, maybe in the United States of America. New York City subway station, the platforms getting on, and then the trains during the rush hour. New York City had the big, giant outbreak. So I think for the virus to be transmitted, it's lots of people, strangers, who may have some that are positive, on top of one another, bumping into each other, the snot coming off your nose, and he's right all over here, or kissing, family members, you're hugging your child. If the child you can see how all of that can move it about. But the general casual contact of life doesn't seem to spread this virus, which is why lockdowns not only didn't help, they may have made things worse. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. After all the ragging people were doing on me, are you going to post your Kentucky Derby picks? Well, we have, but I would advise you to not check them out for a few hours, because there has been this afternoon a scratch of a horse, and it was the horse that I had picked to finish 4th in the race. So I'm just going to take him out and change the bets where I take that number out. It's might a little tweak, but it'll take Paul and I a little while to get it revised. The Kentucky Derby, which is being held this Saturday, 4 months later than normal, is likely to have the most overwhelming favorite that the race has seen in 30 or 40 years. You can go back to a Razi in 91, who was an odds-on favorite. I think he's going to be, Tiz the Law is going to be as big a favorite as Honest Pleasure was in 1976. The horse that probably would have been the second choice in the betting, Art Collector, they announced he wasn't going to run earlier in the week. And today a horse named King Guillermo, who probably would have been the third or fourth choice in the wagering, he's also scratched. Both minor little issues, but enough to keep them out of the race. A horse named Honor AP is one of the few that many people think have a chance to beat Tiz the Law. And for that reason, Tiz the Law is going to, I think he could go off at as low as 2 to 5, 3 to 5, incredibly short odds. For that reason, it's just almost impossible for me to pick a horse that low of odds, because even if you're right, it's very, very hard to win any money because the payoffs are so slim. Tiz the Law has been by far the most dominant 3-year-old in racing this year. He's won all 4 of his races and just crushed his opposition. Unless the horse is literally a superstar, one of the best horses of all time, he's at a point where he should be regressing, and I think he may regress here, and I am not going to pick him to win, which seems really stupid. But as I say, if I'm going to give you a recommendation for your best opportunity to be right and do financially well, it isn't by picking a 2 to 5 shot to win, especially when I think there's a pretty good chance that he's going to lose the race. I am picking Honor AP to win, and There are a couple of long shots that I like as well, including attachment rate. But I do have picks. Now, if you want to just print off the stuff that I have there, just as most people who know horse racing would know, you just draw a line through the horse that's scratched and you don't include him. But I am going to redo it so that his name isn't even in there. But that'll take a little bit of time after we get done with the program. We've been talking about what's been going on all over the area for a long time, and it has gotten worse. Over the past summer, the politicization that goes on within the education of our kids in the public schools. And most cases, people don't find out about this because the kids don't tell their parents, and they don't think anything of it. One more story to share. I am not going to name the teacher here, even though the teacher has so far at least not responded to me. It is a physics teacher, however, at Waukesha South High School. Physics. You wouldn't think you could politicize physics, right? The physics teacher is requiring the physics class to watch a presentation by Megan Ming Francis. This thing's been a big deal on YouTube. She talks about racial injustice and inequality. It's basically left-wing stuff about how we're all a racist country and so on. She calls it the TED Talk. This is a physics instructor requiring his physics class to watch it. Now, I've reached out to the Waukesha School District the second day in a row that I've had to do so, and at least as of a couple of hours ago, I have not gotten a response. This is the problem that we have. A, the physics teacher isn't having kids learn physics when they're watching this latest screed on social justice and how we're all racist and so on. And secondly, it doesn't even deserve to be in a social studies class, much less physics. This is political ideologizing, and it is not the job of the schools to jam it down people's throats, even if they believe we are a racist nation. And it is going to continue until these school districts stop unprofessional teachers from behaving in this type of fashion. It's 6:06 at News Talk 1130 WISN. We're going to go for our second winner of the day on my program in the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest right after the break. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Tom Seaver died. Just hard for me to process the notion that Tom Seaver was an old man, because Tom Seaver has always seemed young to me. So if Tom Seaver's an old man, that means the rest of us are all becoming older too. Tom Seaver was one of the best baseball pitchers of the 60s and 70s, and legitimate Major League Baseball Hall of Famer. He just associated with so many things. He came up with the New York Mets, came out of their system during a time in which the Mets were terrible, and then all of a sudden in 1969, they won the whole thing. They won the World Series. That was the year of the incredible collapse of the Chicago Cubs. And Seaver was the best pitcher on the team and the best pitcher throughout the 70s. And after that, he was a longtime broadcaster, and he just always looked like a kid. He had the greatest nickname, Tom Terrific, which was based off of a cartoon character that, believe it or not, aired on the Captain Kangaroo show. But that was his nickname, and he was this, not only a great ambassador for the game, just this dominant pitcher who kind of personified for a lot of people what a baseball player ought to be. My memory of Tom Seaver, I remember this one I remember clearly. Some of them are fuzzy. It was, my grandmother was a giant Cubs fan. And is that humiliating to admit or not? It is. Well, not my fault she was a Cubs fan. In fact, I deserve credit for not letting that get into my DNA system. I actually cheered for the Cubs when I lived in Illinois in the 80s, because it was that or the Cardinals when I was down there. Anyway, she's a huge Cubs fan, and this happened to be in that gap period between the Braves and the Brewers. Remember, the Braves left in 65, and the Brewers came back in 70. And I had this grandmother. She would listen to the Cubs broadcasts on the radio. There were no Cubs games on TV up in the Fox Valley, none. Sunday afternoons, they'd show a game with Jack Brickhouse. But during the week, she'd listen to Vince and Lou on the radio, and that was her thing, and she just was into the Cubs and that team. From that era, managed by Leo DeRocher, it was a really good team. I mean, I think I could probably name the lineup. They had Kessinger at short, Becker at second, Ernie Banks played first, Ron Santo was at third. I think Randy Hundley might have been the catcher, Billy Williams in left. Adolfo Phillips and Jimmy Qualls split center field. Maybe Lou Johnson played right. And then they had pretty good pitching staff. Ken Holtzman, Fergie Jenkins, Phil Regan out of the bullpen. Anyway, that team looked like it was going to be the first Cubs team to win a championship in decades. They had this huge lead. And there was a game on national TV. I don't know the month, but I bet it was August. It was right around the time the Cubs started to collapse. We didn't know they collapsed yet. The Cubs are playing the Mets, and the game was on national TV. I think probably the Monday night game of the week, so my grandmother could watch the game on TV. She had a color TV, and for me, that was a big thing, so I went over to her house to watch that game. Tom Seaver was pitching for the Mets. And like I said, my grandmother's this huge Cubs fan. Would you believe it? Remember now, this is the era for somebody like me. I saw one baseball game a week. There's no Brewer local broadcast because there was no baseball team in Milwaukee. There'd be the game of the week on Saturday afternoon, and then they switched and they started showing in the summer these national games, I think, on Monday night. That's the only time I get to see watching baseball on TV, but I knew who all these players were, and I was a sports fan, and so on. So to say that there's so much that I hadn't seen, I just didn't see much baseball other than the game of the week on TV. I just knew all about it. First inning, second inning, third inning. We're going to go to the sixth inning. Would you believe that Tom Seaver has a perfect game going? The guy's pitching a perfect game on national TV. This is back when that was still really rare. Seventh inning, Tom Seaver's got a perfect game. He goes into the eighth. He's got a perfect game. Now, my grandmother is so mad. She just wants the Cubs to win the game. And I'm thinking, man, I might be watching a perfect game. Ninth inning. I'm pretty sure I have this all correct. I think he carried it to 1 out in the ninth, and I think it was Jimmy Qualls that got some sort of dumb job of a hit, and that broke up the perfect game. But that was Tom Seaver, and, Shea Stadium, the Mets clean-cut guy. As it turns out, this is what just scares you when you get to the sort of age that I'm approaching, is you just hope these things don't happen. He's not that old, 75. He had everything go wrong. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia about a year ago, had made no public appearances, and at the end, he had all of the following when he died this week. He had Lewy body dementia. That's when your dementia is literally affecting all of your faculties and control of yourself. COVID-19, was very ill, bedridden, etc., and fortunately, he died in his sleep. But I think that Tom Seaver's an old guy dying of that is... Oh, yeah, he'll be marked as a COVID death, and perhaps rightly so, and perhaps not, but again, it's the case of so many of them beaten down with 92 different things. Maybe COVID was the last punch that came to his body when he did pass away, but Tom Seaver was one of the greatest pitchers that I've ever seen. And just it's one thing when, like, old guys die, and you're accustomed to football players dying because they've all gotten dementia and Alzheimer's and taken it to the head and all of that. Baseball players, though, I mean, I think of Hank Aaron. They lived to be 125 years old. Tom Seaver dying, and that's one that hits me. All right. And I bet I have that story almost entirely down. And I remember that 69 Cubs season, and I remember my grandmother just being so disgusted in September when they fell apart. And I think it was 69. It was 67? I hope I don't have all of it wrong, but I think I've got it right. I think it was 69. Anyway. Sizzling Summer Cash Contest, text in word. We already had a winner earlier on the program. Christopher Andrich of Hartford won in the 3 o'clock hour. Your chance to win here by texting in the word check, C-H-E-C-K, check to 200-200. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. I even remember the Mets team. The Mets were managed by a guy who went on to baseball's Hall of Fame. Played, I think, his entire career in New York City himself. Gil Hodges played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was the manager of the Mets, and they caught Leo DeRocher and the Cubs, and it was considered one of the great choke jobs of all time, and one of the many stories that add to the lore of the Cubs being just the most pathetic bunch of losers, something that they never really overcame until they won that World Series a few years ago. I mean, that Cubs team, probably 3 Hall of Famers. Ernie Banks is in the Hall of Fame. I think Billy Williams is in the Hall of Fame. Is Ron Santo in the Hall of Fame? Not sure. I don't think any of their pitchers would have been, but the Mets team, probably the only guy on the Mets that made the Hall of Fame would have been Tom Seaver from that era. Although both managers, DeRocher and Gil Hodges, Hall of Fame. Show's completely falling apart. Traffic isn't working. The pre-recorded thing, which is all screwed up because it says the following show. It's actually the preceding show. Then it ends and he's nowhere to be found. Where were you? Talking to the cleaning. Oh, that's right. You can tell that it's the end of my week and I don't do a Friday show. Paul is already done for the week altogether. I'm still here waiting for him to come back into the studio to get me back on the air as he's yapping to the cleaning crew in there. He wonders how long it'd go by. It was at least 12 minutes. I mean, it always seems longer than it is. I bet it was like 12 seconds. So it was up there for a while. Anyway, proof that everything's in the internet. Would you believe I found the box score from the baseball game I was talking about? It wasn't in August. It was in July. But I had everything else correct, including that it was Jimmy Qualls that got the hit to break up the perfect game in the ninth inning. It was July 9th at Shea Stadium in New York that Seaver almost pitched the perfect game. And there was one more Hall of Famer involved in that game that I didn't think of. He was a baseline coach. The first base coach for the New York Mets that year was, this is just a great story, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra coached first for the Mets. The rest of the lineup, though, that I had down pat. Let's end with this. I have always tried to make the distinction between private school teachers who are dedicated to their craft and public school teachers who are often union hacks, who are more interested in ideologizing and are concerned only with how much money they make and how quickly they can retire. That's not all public school teachers, but I think, unfortunately, it's the majority of them. So, I'd like to share the following. I received this from a kindergarten teacher at a private school. She writes, I won't read her name. Mark, thank you for making the distinction in recent weeks between private school and public school teachers. I have been teaching in a private evangelical Christian schools in Milwaukee and Waukesha counties for over 20 years and have constantly felt slighted when lumped in with public school teachers when policy issues relating to education over the years. My salaries have paled in comparison, and my benefits, aside from tuition discounts for my own children, have been for the most part, non-existent. I do not complain because I believe in what I am doing, and I believe in the parents' right to choose what kind of education they want for their children. My current school is now open, and every single teacher chose to return for in-person learning. We have made accommodations to our setups and schedules to be able to see our students in person and do our jobs well. On our first day of classes, I was overwhelmed with emotion as I stopped and thought about how grateful I was for being back in my classroom, surrounded by the little people whose families I have dedicated my life to educate and serve. In all fairness, I do have several friends that are public school teachers who feel the same way I do about the necessity of having in-person school. Unfortunately, they are not the loudest voices, she goes on. It's heartwarming to know that many of the people in private schools and some in public schools actually care about being in the classroom and educating their kids and are not sitting around being fraidy cats afraid they're going to get COVID while they continue to whine and bellyache and complain in front of the classroom and make mockeries of their teaching profession by simply ideologizing and spewing out their left-wing radicalism. One of the reasons that I am a strong advocate of private schools is, even though some of them can be crappy and some can be great, just like every other product, it gives parents a choice. And right now, it's the only alternative we have and the only place you can really turn to hope that some of the garbage that's going on in the public schools will be stopped, because unfortunately, too many school boards and school superintendents approve of it. As for the attitude of the teachers, if you're a teacher and you don't want to be involved in in-person learning right now, you're essentially saying you're too afraid to teach. We're better off without you. Out of time for today's show. Paul, you can go talk to the cleaning lady now.